We're delighted to welcome you to this session of the 15th Jaipur Literature Festival, protected by Dettol Banega Swasth India. This session is presented by the Australian High Commission. It's our pleasure to present today Son of Sin, Omar Sakr in conversation with Karuna Ezara Parikh. An estranged father, an abusive mother, a fierce army of relatives, and a wide tapestry of violence woven across generations and geographies is the grand inheritance of a young queer Arab boy in Western Sydney. Son of Sin is award-winning Arab-Australian queer poet Omar Sakr's debut novel. His acclaimed poetry includes the collections These Wild Horses and The Lost Arabs. Both explore complexities of identity such as race, nationality, gender, faith, and poverty, at the heart of which are notions of belonging and not. Son of Sin is a lyrical, honest, at once tender and striking coming-of-age novel. It's a portrait of Jamal Smith and the threads which constrict and also conflate to form his experiences: love, friendship, faith, and self-discovery. In conversation today with writer and poet Karuna Ezara Parikh, Sakr discusses his extraordinary, brimming, and inherently human debut novel. Omar Sakr is the author of two acclaimed poetry collections, These Wild Horses and The Lost Arabs, which won the 2020 Prime Minister's Literary Award for Poetry. His debut novel, Son of Sin, is out now. Karuna Ezara Parikh is a poet and writer, former television anchor and model. Her work has appeared in Vogue, The Wire, India Today, and Tehelka, amongst others. Parikh's novel, The Heart Asks Pleasure First, was published in 2020, and her first book of poems, Where Stories Gather, was published in 2021. Please feel free to send in your comments by typing them in the comment section. Please do follow our social media handles to get notifications on all the upcoming sessions. Do tweet using hashtag Jaipur Literature Festival 2022 and tag at Jaipurlitfest. Ladies and gentlemen, Son of Sin, Omar Sakr in conversation with Karuna Ezara Parikh.
Hi, Omar. Congratulations. I've just finished reading your fantastic novel. So congratulations. How does it feel to finally have it out?
Hi, and thank you so much. It's overwhelming, but it's a really nice feeling.
Yeah. So I understand that you published 2 volumes of poetry before this, and this is your first novel. Honestly, I get asked this all the time. So I'm going to ask you, how does it feel to make the transition from poetry to a novel?
Yeah, that is the question everyone seems most interested in asking.
Yeah.
The transition is long. It's long. That's my main takeaway. It takes a long time to write a novel. But you know, it's interesting because I see poetry as synthesizing language to capture an emotion, and with prose it's more like you're building the whole world before, during, and after the emotion. So it's a lot more labor intensive, but it's got its own attractions. You know, there's a depth of feeling that you get to after a while, that's almost addictive, in how much it takes you like out of this present moment and into what you're creating. Whereas with a poem, it can feel like it's,
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah, I did the opposite. I did my novel first and then my poetry, and I get asked that all the time about the transition. And I find it actually remarkable that you did it the other way around, because building the world of a novel is I mean, it is, as you said, so large, and there's so much depth to it, and each story kind of takes you, each character's story takes you to a new place. Was the novel something that you had in mind for a while? Was it something that you were aiming towards, or you knew you were going to attempt, or did it come to you suddenly? I was very curious because it reads so authentically.
I will answer this question, but I just want to go back a little bit because I'm very interested that you started with a novel and then went to poetry. Now I have to ask you that question. Why?
I thought I'm the one asking the questions here.
I feel like that's a rarer shift. I feel like it's, I don't know, fairly common for poets to go to a novel, but it's weird to do it the other way around.
Well, I was always writing poetry, to be fair, but I never thought of publishing it. And, the poetry was very much for myself and shared with a very small audience. And I never thought of myself as a poet. And then but I always knew I wanted to write the novel. So once I got that out of the way, there was this opportunity for me to publish my poetry after that, and I got offered that, which is not something I had dreamt for myself maybe before that. But that's why I'm curious to know, was the novel something you always knew you're going to do? Was it? Yeah.
Okay, so it is similar in that I always wanted to write stories, and I never saw myself as a poet. Didn't even like poetry up until couple years ago. So yeah, I just wasn't good at it, writing stories, writing fiction. I would write short stories all the time, but I wasn't paying enough attention to the language and specifically my own language or languages, plural, and the syntax, the way that I think and speak, and the way people think and speak around me, the uniqueness of that is what kind of brings my work to life. And so once I started studying poetry and I learned that, and it gave me the tools that I needed to be a better writer, I realized that it was kind of time to try my hand again at fiction. And it's been good.
Yeah, it's I'm sure it feels rewarding. I have to say, when I was reading your novel, it felt like it was written by a poet. I don't know if that makes sense, but there was sentences. I mean, there are sentences that are just breathtakingly beautiful, but it's also the way words come together and are ordered. It's not the usual sort of structure of a sentence that you would expect sometimes. There's also a sense of rhythm or even a sense of rhyme sometimes in the novel as well. And I found that really beautiful. So I think there is something to be said for poets writing novels. But what really also interested me, and I'm sure you're going to get asked this a lot, is how much of Jamal, your protagonist, how much of Jamal's life has been informed by yours? Because, to be honest, when I started reading this, I thought it was a work of autofiction. I really felt that. And then, I read a little about it and read your words about it, and you call Jamal your distant avatar, which is really nice, a nice way to describe it rather than call it autofiction. But how much would you say, and of course his heritage is the same as yours, so I was wondering how much has it informed it? And I find it an annoying question, but I'm going to ask it anyway.
Yeah, no, it's okay. He's my life informs this book a great deal. I think the broad kind of biographical details are the same. I don't really like the term autofiction though. I don't like the term autobiography either. I distrust memory. And, I just kind of have this wariness over I don't know, relying too much on the authority that seems to be given to the claim that this particular experience was quote unquote real.
And does it matter, right? That's another question. Does it matter?
Yeah, and it's weird. It's weird. It doesn't, you know. I try to say that the book is informed as much by my nightmares and fantasies as my experiences, and I know memory to be a fickle thing. And so really what I'm trying to do with language is create an experience that is close to what it felt like, right? Rather than to what it was as like a fact, as a like concrete thing. I don't believe in that.
Rather than base it on incident, which, as you said, is just memory actually, when you look back on it, and is unreliable. And I feel like, in a sense, you answered this in the book itself when you say all we are is memory and myth, and memory fades. So what you're left with, of course, are the myths, and we are free to make up our own about our own lives, right? I wanted to ask you about, you know, the way you've used language in the book. You know, dialogue is very, very sparse actually, and when it appears, it's extremely unpretentious, the dialogue between characters, and it's very believable because of that. You know, and the dialogue is much rougher than the rest of the writing. The rest of the writing is the poet's hand, but the dialogue has that roughness, you know, of the boys who are talking to each other, and it holds the weight of their upbringing with it, right? But with how sparse the dialogue is, let me get this thought right. I was very fascinated by it. So I felt the silence around Jamal a lot. And I wondered if this was, you know, it was sort of, because everything else is just, we are hearing the story through his feelings and his thoughts, but not words exchanged with other peers or family members. And through that, you sense his immense loneliness. And I wondered if this was conscious, you know, this use of language in this very sparse way with dialogue. Yeah.
Thank you so much for that question. I got like goosebumps a little bit because I was like, it's like exactly what I wanted and hoped for. Yeah, to the extent that it even informed my decision to not include speech tags around the dialogue, because I didn't want it to stand out too much, and to even imply, or at least leave open the idea that none of this is happening, or that it's all being retold, right? So it's all happening in his head or some variation thereof. Because, as you say, silence is the main element in his life. It's what everything is pushing up against. And it's in his job as a transcriber, he's not speaking, he's writing down the words of other people. And yeah, so it just makes me really happy that
it definitely
understood that, and
definitely comes across. It really does. And you know, the thing with having the quotation marks or speech tags, that too, it has that drifting sense of Jamal's life as well, right? And with the presence of the jinns and the angels, you know, the animals, it definitely echoes that silence of his life. And I actually thought that you did it really, really well. And I think all readers will probably notice, because it is its own character. The silence is its own character in the book, you know.
That's
There are
awesome. Thank you.
two other unspoken characters, and for me they were very much main characters in the book, and the other characters of pleasure and shame. You know, the
Yeah.
sort of and you know, the family acts as the stark backdrop to that, right, and to these very polarized feelings of Jamal. So I mean, the family itself, we have to talk about that, but I first want to ask you, you know, about pleasure and shame. And it in fact, the book in fact opens with that, right? It opens during Ramzan, and it opens with those dual ideas sort of battling each other, and even, you know, the pleasure of waiting so long and then eating that food, you know, at iftar. And I wondered also about how you brought God into that, but how you invoked God not just for the moments of shame, but for the moments of pleasure as well. I thought that was very brave. I have to say, the first time I read the Bismillah in that scene, you know, I was a bit shocked, because I thought, oh, that's cheeky, and then I thought, oh, that's very brave. And so you invoke God in his moments of pleasure, which are also in his mind moments of sin. And I wanted to ask you about that.
Yeah, thank you. It's scary to do, because I know my community, and I'm aware of the taboos that I'm writing toward and against. But yeah, for me, God is everything, and there is I don't know what there's a cheapness, maybe a superficial kind of attitude toward what constitutes divinity. And I think that most often people make God small, and reflective of their own tininess, and it is embarrassing. You know, I think, really and truly.
Yeah.
Um,
Instead of the largeness and the benevolence of an imagined God, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
And so one of the reasons I like to lead with Bismillah, and why I like to lead with, why I often reference the most merciful, the most compassionate in my work, is because there's this idea in Islam that the name by which you call God is the name by which he will answer. And so if you are imagining and calling on God in, let's say, an angry or judgmental way, then that is the name by which he will answer, and I choose not to.
Yeah. Sorry, go on. Yeah.
No, and I was just going to say, you know, shame obviously has played an outsized role in my life, but it's useful, right? It's really useful in understanding, in identifying what you need to understand about yourself and your family and how you're coming together.
Yeah, and I think you say it's played a role in your life, and it plays such a major role in the novel as well, and in Jamal's life. And like I said, for me, the concepts of pleasure and shame, and that so much of the pleasure he experiences is outside what is permissible, and how, you know, because of that, he chooses to feel nothing often. I found that journey also very profound. You mentioned the family and the concept of shame and the family. So the family is, that's the world of the book. The family is just this really sort of crowded space, right? The pages, it's just, so I'm going to show you something. This will make you laugh. When I started reading, I actually, within the first few pages, I was like, oh shit, I need to make a family tree. And so I started creating one right here. I don't know if you can see it because there's a lot of
I
light.
can't really.
Yeah,
It's sort of like,
but basically I started writing down this family tree. And I was like, oh, they should have included this. Why do I have to make it? And then after a few pages more, I understood that that's the point. You can't keep track of it. And there's characters, there's cousins who appear for one meal, and there's cousins who have died tragically, but you only meet them for 2 scenes. And then there's, an aunt who's, married to some rich asshole, and, and it goes on like that. And it reflects that world so well. And, being Indian, I understand that world as well. This is very much the world of many brown cultures, right? And it is so crowded and it is so claustrophobic. And as it comes up in the book, there's no stillness to it. And I found that brilliantly reflected in that, you've replicated that for the reader, where the reader, like Jamal, cannot keep track of it. But I really wanted to talk about that family and talk about the layers to it, and also the fact that this is also at the core of it. This is a refugee and an immigrant story, and that is so pertinent now with what's happening in the world. And you mentioned it a little bit with, it comes up as Syria, but this is an old story. My father actually grew up in Lebanon, and his family left. His family left and came back to India, just before the war as well. But they were coming back home, and I cannot, and he still misses it, but I can't imagine what it must be like for the generations of Lebanese families who came to Australia in the 70s, and so this, for me, this also the story of a refugee or immigrant family, right? So yeah, that's another story that's playing in the background of Jamal's life constantly. And I think that also, in some sense, I think contributes very much to the characters' sense of unbelonging, right?
yeah, absolutely. I think the experience of being in a diasporic community and family is a precarious one. And that's the reason why those communities tend to be so much more conservative than their home countries and home cultures, which continue to grow and change. But when you've left it, been forced to leave it, you cling on as hard as possible to what you know of it and what you remember. And in doing so, you create, tragically, a false image of, what it is to be Lebanese or Turkish or, whatever your heritage is.
It's very stuck.
And so when you're within that and you become aware that your behavior or your identity, yourself, is not permissible to these people who you love and who are your only safe place in the world, it's terrifying. And I think that, that's kind of why that's kind of why he's so lonely, right? Because the only safe place in the world that he knows is not actually safe.
Yeah. And this is a common story with, say, third and fourth generation immigrants, right? Where there's this complete disconnect, right? And with the diaspora, it's so common. And it's also interesting because you cover 3 generations of 2 sides of a family in this book. And you already see the difference in, say, Jamal's mother's generation, right? Where Jamal's mother, she's a fascinating character. And, you already see her living outside, outside the edges of this society that has all these rules, especially for women and their place. And what's interesting is that Jamal and his brother, who themselves are living even further outside that space, she is a mild embarrassment as well, right? And so there's the layers of that society. And I, without giving any spoilers to anyone, I love, how that story unfolds by the end.
Yeah. I think, I don't like I don't like reading books where, there's a family that's just this small family, everyone, their stories, and it never feels real to me. I'm always like, that's not life, right? This is one of the reasons why I wanted to create something that reflected the actual experience, which, I had some comments from my publisher, early on, like, oh, this is a bit overwhelming. Like, the family members, how many of them there are? Can you keep track of them? And I was like, no, you can't. You're not supposed to. I certainly couldn't as a kid. But then also another thing is that trauma is often used in these simplistic narratives that I've come across, as a plot point, something resolvable. And to me, trauma is a condition through which you live, and it shapes you from start to finish.
Yeah.
And it's an ongoing phenomenon. And what I wanted to show in this book is how the characters in the family are all reacting differently to that phenomenon, because it's invisible, right? Trauma, but it's a force that's still affecting everyone in the scenes.
And it's passed down over the generations. It's each generation is living the other's trauma. But I like that there's a question of, but do they need to pay for their sins?
Yeah.
So, Omar, what you were saying about trauma, there's a different way you deal with it in the book. One side is, of course, the family. That's one of Jamal's worlds in the book. But the other is the world of family that he creates and the family he chooses, which is our friends, right? And I think a lot of us have that growing up where, to escape the violence of family, sometimes, you create your own family, you pick and choose, and he chooses his group of weirdos, as we each do. And even there, he finds there are problems, of course, as there are with any group of friends. But for me, what stood out is that as much as this is a coming out story, it is also a coming of age story. And I found the male bonding a very, very intense part of this book, whether it's sexually or whether it's just finding, and it keeps coming up, that question of 2 boys trying to one-up each other, of vulnerability, of a boy being vulnerable and then hoping his friend is vulnerable back, sharing grief, not sharing it, withholding that as power. So I mean, I found that very layered. Was that something important to you while writing this? The question of male friendship?
Yeah, absolutely. My friends, who I base these characters off of, with their knowledge, and yeah, look, I don't think we would have survived without each other. It really is as stark as that. And I think masculinity is just a deadly trap.
The worst.
And yeah, absolutely. And I wish I could say that chosen family is safe, is an alternative to your blood. But the reality is that with love comes risk of harm. And yeah, I don't want to sanitize that. I don't want to simplify it in any way. I think we all long for safety, but and we should strive for it always. But let's not pretend that we can't hurt each other, because we can, and we do often. But I guess one of the questions that I'm always thinking about is, how do we heal? And how do we forgive each other? And for me, I think the key to that is understanding the forces that are shaping our decisions, but also taking accountability for our actions, irrespective of that understanding, right? Or irrespective of that context. Like, understanding it, cool, good. But then also taking accountability for the decisions you made.
And asking, what is your contribution to the situation? There's a line in the book. I've actually written it down. I wrote down so many of the lines. They're so good. There's a line in the book which, later on in the book, Jamal meets Qasim, and he actually Qasim says to him, he said, I'd walk around these alleys yelling and arguing with God. I realized that arguing meant I knew he was listening. And I feel like, though this line is very much about his relationship with God, it kind of, for me, applied to all the relationships in the book. And it became, for me, very significant of Jamal's relationships, because, he can get away if he actually chose to. But the fact that he continues to be there and fight it, even to hate, is to still be invested in those relationships, And for me, that line sort of echoed all that. The boys, of course, they're so big in the book, but as a woman, I loved reading the quiet power of the women in the book, whether it was his grandmothers, whether it was his mother, and you allude to that, and to their power in many different ways. And there's this sort of, division where the younger boys, they're so in awe of sexy young women, a lot of them, and and as soon as a girl turns her back, their way to gain power from what they feel is to immediately call her a bitch. And then, of course, separately, there's the respect for the mother figure, and you speak about the mother's feet again and again in the book. And so I found that I mean, I found that really incredible, the way you've woven in the stories of women. And, our communities are not good to women, we know that. And
Yeah.
I felt a deep empathy in your novel for the feminine experience. And how did you tap into that, and how did you work it into the book so subtly, where none of them are really main characters, but I felt their presence throughout, That is often how it is with women in our communities, that they are actually holding everything together without being seen,
Yeah, that's a big question. It's a big question. It's a really good one. It's really complicated. It's really complicated. I've always been struck by the power women have in our community. I know that the outside view is that they're victims, or they've been bamboozled or trapped, or whatever it is. I have not yet met the woman that the outsiders describe. I have not met that woman. I haven't, right? And even when I was a kid, and I described this scene in the books, the men go outside all together. All the men are outside smoking and talking, being manly, and the women are inside. And you have this idea is present that there's this segregation, and this segregation is bad, but the women actually don't want the men inside. They want them outside because they're useless and they're just in the way, and so that they can do everything that needs to be done. These are ferociously competent people who somehow manage to raise families in countries that despise them, with men who are just useless at the best of times. And that's not even, I gotta be honest, like that's also partly that's a problem in the culture, because our mothers don't teach the boys how to cook or how to clean.
And we see that in the novel as well, even when they want to learn.
Yeah, even when they want to learn. And there is a power in this. There is a power in holding, for example, the ingredients, the recipes to your culture. Women are the possessors of our culture, and they pass it down to their daughters, who have this unbroken experience of knowing the tastes, the flavors of our ancestors. And the boys don't have this. The boys can't make this.
Sorry.
Yeah, and there's this sense of, the reason I believe that this is so often withheld, that it shouldn't be, but it's about saying, you need us.
Yeah. And I think that's so much of what, I don't want to use the word toxic, but difficult family relationships are, especially in immigrant communities and frankly everywhere. It's a play of dependence and interdependence, isn't it? And I've just got a message saying that we do need to wrap this up very soon. I had so many more questions for you, actually.
I'll just finish the thought.
Please.
Which is that how did I tap into that particular kind of aspect of the novel? is the strategizing that women have to do to survive is familiar to me as a queer man who had to develop strategies to survive, right? And I think we're always doing that. We're in this kind of maladaptive dance where we're all doing our best to hold on in really terrible circumstances. But yeah, it was super important to me that the women without whom our communities would just fail entirely, and who have to give so much more than anyone should ever have to give. But they do, they do. And the things that my mum has done and given the strength that she has, I am in awe of, and I will always be in awe of. And so it was very important to me that strength and complexity came through, and I'm very happy that you seem to have picked up on it.
It very much does. And as a woman, I felt very represented by that, and I felt very seen. And I do believe that, though I think of it as a very male model, a very male model of novel, I did feel that the women were present constantly. There was so much more I wanted to ask you. We haven't yet spoken about the question of fathers. We haven't even spoken about the question of patriotism. But I think that says so much about your novel that one can speak endlessly about it. And congratulations. It really is very beautiful and very moving. And I wish it and you all the best.
Thank you so much. This was amazing, and I don't need to do any more interviews. Like I got what I needed out of this. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Omar Sakr and Karuna Ezara Parikh, for that brilliant conversation. This session was presented by the Australian High Commission. Thank you all for watching and being such a great audience. Sessions are ongoing across all our 3 venues, Front Lawn, Mughal Tent, and Darbar Hall. Hope to see you in the next session. And now for a GLF Writer Shorts.